VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We're here to talk about the 6-4 Vikings. This team has won 5 straight games. I'll continue to say it. The moment Justin Jefferson got hurt, the team started winning games. It's absolutely mind-boggling. We've got to a point where, and I'm going to talk about this all show, we're going to go through a bunch of stuff, that the Vikings are no longer a guessing game. At 1-4, they weren't even supposed to do anything. They're supposed to be down for the count. And then you string together 2 wins after that. Let's see, they beat the Bears in ugly fashion. That was a springboard to the 49ers, their signature win. And even at 4-4, you could start to nibble at, could this team get hot and make the playoffs? But it wasn't overly realistic. The identity of this entire show today is to make the case mathematically and, in an argumentative sense that this team is no longer, it's not a matter of what ifs. It's not a guessing game about whether or not they're good. It's not a maybe if they're going to reach the postseason. The Vikings are good. They're not a guessing game, and they're in the driver's seat to reach the postseason. So I want you guys and gals to readjust your expectations. A month and a half ago, when we chatted on this show on a daily basis, it was like, higher draft pick, probably a lost season. Who knows what happens with Cousins thereafter. But it's like 2017 all over again, with a defense that isn't quite as good as 2017, but with some offensive heroism without Justin Jefferson, who should be back soon. The sky is the limit. It is just like 2017, the way events have transpired, per injuries, per an unsung quarterback that people thought might be good. He was good in college. Now he is good for these Vikings. The team is down to nubbins on the depth chart per playmakers and at quarterback, and they've suddenly won, multiple games to the tune of 5. This is what the Vikings do. They did it in 2005 with Dante Culpepper. When he tore his ACL and MCL, they won 6 straight games. When Sam Bradford was formally knocked out against the Bears on Monday Night Football in 2017, the Vikings won 8 straight. Now, whether you want to look at it from the lens of Jefferson going out, they've won 5 straight, or now the lens of Kirk going out, they've won 2 straight. So it's something about this franchise that when the backup quarterback comes in, it's really not a total lost cause. In fact, the team curiously gets better. All right, so here is why, about 6-7 things, why the Vikings are no longer a guessing game. And you don't have to wonder if they're any good. They are. Josh Dobbs is good. Now, the guy is cast away by 7 teams since 2017, and more strange in the last 2 years, the Browns and Lions wouldn't even nominate him for QB3 or the practice squad. So when he came to the Vikings via trade, about 2 weeks ago now, it was like, well, what are we getting? Journeyman, isn't that old? 28 years old, he's mobile, that's cool. But in these last 2 games, myself and I think you guys and gals, you've treaded gingerly, waiting for, kind of like we did with Keenum, waiting for, all right, when does the Cinderella end? When does the Cinderella run end? When does he turn into a pumpkin? What's the bad shit that he does? And I don't think that that's going to come out. I think I know this is a very smart man, smarter than me, smarter than you. And it's bizarre that no team really allowed him to take the plunge until the Cardinals did this year. So I think that what is among us right now is that this guy is an unearthed gem who's actually quite good. I think we should probably be done looking at him through the guise of, all right, well, he's a QB2, QB3 that's having a couple good games. When you watch him and in the way that he's coached with Kevin O'Connell, I think he is a QB1 in this league, and now we have to figure out how good of a QB1. Yes, he fumbles a lot. He didn't do that yesterday, thank goodness, but his early career woes involved fumbles, especially the starts. I think he had 12 and 10 starts, and which was in the last 20 years, like 4th most or something like that. So up until yesterday, it was reasonable to talk about, all right, Dobbs, we're getting a good QB2 the rest of the way, and then we'll see some of the bad stuff that he does. But right now, I've become convinced that he is more than just some team's backup. I think he is a fringe, entry-level quarterback that with a good coach, kind of like the 49ers have done for years with, quarterbacks, just pick one, throw him in there, he'll do all right. I think that is what Dobbs has become for these Vikings, in part because of his skill set. He's mobile as hell, and then Kevin O'Connell's play calling. So until he proves otherwise, now he could come out against the Broncos Sunday night and look horrific. I will look dumb, and we'll have to revise all of our takes. But let's just say it. Josh Dobbs is good, and I think it's foolish to keep looking at him through glasses that say, well, he's a QB2, QB3 Lions and Browns and Cardinals didn't want. I think he's a good, decent QB1 that is waiting to be sculpted the rest of the way. Incidentally, thereafter, it's criminal that Kirk Cousins doesn't get to wallow in or relish in this suddenly good Vikings defense. In the first 3 games against the Buccaneers, Eagles, and Chargers, the Vikings ranked 26th in the league per defensive EPA per play. That's an efficiency metric. That's Ben Baldwin's website. So that's 7th worst. The first 3 weeks, the Vikings had the 7th worst defense. Since then, they've morphed into the NFL's a top 4 defense in those weeks. Ultimately, altogether now, per that metric, they're the 9th defense overall. But since they got that shit out of their system against the Chargers, they're not just a passable average defense. The Brian Flores unit has gelled on the fly. And again, it's really sad that Kirk Cousins didn't get to see it through when the Vikings, 2018, 2019, they had a good defense on his watch. But since then, they have not. But now Josh Dobbs, the good QB1 Josh Dobbs, gets to utilize this defense. And in the last, week 4, in the last 6 games or so, the Vikings have performed at a top 5 or top 4 clip per EPA per play. And that, you can feel it in your bones when you're watching each drive. There's a reasonable expectation when the other team gets the ball, they're not going to march like they did the first 3 weeks. So they're not going to march like they did when Ed Donatel was head coach. So the defense is here, and so it'd be really weird if the whole group just regressed, and it should only get better when Marcus Davenport gets back. So beyond, number 1, number 2, I'm going to get to number 1 here in a second. The number 2 smoking gun that has catalyzed this turnaround is defense. Number 1 for me is turnovers. The common theme of this show for the first several weeks was, if they just stop fumbling the ball and throwing interceptions, especially in the first quarter, this would be a good football team. I stopped saying that after about 5 games because I looked like an asshole saying the same thing every week, and then they'd go out and fumble the first play, whether it was Josh Oliver, Alexander Madison. Everybody was fumbling in the first quarter, and so that was indicative that this team isn't good. They can't figure out this stuff, and I'm not going to keep telling people they're a good team when they keep turning the ball over in the first quarter. Lo and behold, the early season talker, if they just stopped the turnovers, they would be good. That was true. That happened. They stopped the bonanza of turnovers and now just turn it over at a normal clip. And yesterday had their first game of 2023 where they did not have a fumble interception. And then along the way, the defense is forcing turnovers. That was wholly absent in the first month or so. So once the turnovers figured themselves out, or O'Connell had that baton that he was shoving into dudes' chests to try to pry the ball out at Egan, that was a real thing. They fixed the turnover problem, and the wins started flooding into the damn, stat sheet. And that's the way it goes. Teams that turn the ball over, they're going to suck. Even if they're, against their better angels, they're going to suck. And that's what happened to the Vikings early on. Next, it's no longer a guessing game because they're doing this with a skeleton crew. Justin Jefferson hasn't played since the Chiefs game, the fourth quarter of it. Marcus Davenport's been out since October 18th. Cousins is gone. Cam Akers is gone. But the good news is that the face of the franchise, Justin Jefferson, should be back, whether that's against the Broncos or against the Bears on Monday Night Football. It would be really, really, really strange if the Vikings brought Justin Jefferson back and then they went on a losing streak. Oh, man, that would be bizarre. So the mentality here is that they're only going to get better from here on out. Once Josh Dobbs doesn't have to throw to Hawkinson 11 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown, when he can cut that in half and then throw the other targets to Jefferson, the sky is the limit. So they're going to start getting healthier at a time when they're winning games, and that should coagulate to suggest, all right, this team's going to the postseason. Now how frisky can they be? And that's on top of having it, and suddenly, all of a sudden, I'll say that because we've been through the offensive line hell since Bryant McKinnie and Steve Hutchinson retired. All of a sudden, the Vikings offensive line is flat out good. We prayed, we wrote letters, we chanted for just an average bunch, so we could see really what Kirk Cousins could do if the offensive line ranked 16th in the league, or if they're feeling good, maybe 13th. Well, now the pass protection is way up there in the top of the league, whether it's PFF or ESPN. It's up there in the top 5, and that's all we've dreamed about since about 2011 or so. So the criminality of Cousins not having a defense, and now the Vikings offensive line gets good, and he doesn't get to experience that in totality. That's quite sad, but who cares? It's the next man up, and that's why Josh Dobbs is feasting on both of those attributes of this current brand of Vikings. And that's what good teams, anytime you get to the conference championships, with a small exception of the Bengals, most of the teams have really good offensive lines and really good edge rushers and a pretty productive tight end in the middle of the field. It seems like that's the recent Super Bowl blueprint. And whenever 2019 Vikings or leave last year's Vikings, you tended to look at them as they really don't have a really good offensive line, so I don't think they can go too far, but you don't have to say that anymore. The offensive line is here probably for good, because they found this lineup. Brian O'Neill, let's see, he's on the right side, so Ed Ingram, Garrett Bradbury, Dalton Reisner, and Darisaw. Most of that's going to be intact. I don't know who would leave from the group next year. Maybe Reisner in free agency, but he sounds like he wants to be a Viking forever. So the offensive line is good, and it's here to stay, and hallelujah. We've been asking for it for a long time. And then finally, it's no longer a guessing game, because the Vikings already have the DNA to win close games. They regressed to the mean to start the season. That was bound to happen, and we heard about it all spring and summer, and then boom, it happened. So kudos to those predictors that said, well, they can't win every close game, one-score game. They didn't, and they out of the gate, they weren't very good at that at all, and that's why they had a 1-4 record. But if you look at all of these characteristics, like Dobbs, good, not just some overachiever. The defense is a top 5 unit in the last 6 or 7 games. The turnovers have stabilized. The offensive line is elite. Jefferson's coming back. They already know how to win close games, so that's going to bode well for games against the Bengals, the Lions twice, and whoever they may draw in the postseason, because they're going to get there. Beating the Falcons and Saints and Packers in the last month, those are teams that you're going to stare at in early January for tie-breaking situations. Now, the Vikings own all of them. The only possible hiccup is the Buccaneers get really hot, and then they have the tiebreaker over the Vikings if they both finish 9-8 or something like that. But I think it's a long shot to assume the Buccaneers are going to get unusually hot. All right, that is all of the positivity. The Vikings are no longer a guessing game because of all of those things that I mentioned, especially the turnovers in the rear view and a trustworthy defense that's actually quite good. There's one question mark, and you probably know it is before it rolls off my lips. I don't think the Vikings can contend for a Super Bowl because they don't know how to run the ball, or they don't have the guys for it. And when you have a quarterback where some think the bottom is going to fall out for Josh Dobbs, you need a run game that is at least decent, and in his case, probably good. And the Vikings used to have that with Dalvin Cook from 2017 until 2021. Cook really fell off last year in terms of, per carry expectation, and then more of the same for the Jets this year. Alexander Mattison was the solution in free agency. It doesn't look like that was a home run choice. And then we'll have other guys they can try. Ty Chandler and Nwangu got some carries. Dwayne McBride's chilling on the practice squad. And Myles Gaskin is now back. I don't know if you saw that. They signed him to the practice squad. It's not unheard of that you would go into a playoff push or Super Bowl push with a committee. In fact, that seems to win Super Bowls somehow. But when you don't use the committee well, and, in first down, you run into the line of scrimmage, and before you know it, it's 2nd and 11 or 2nd and 12 every drive. That's going to cause problems when you play the big boys. If you want to go on the road to play San Francisco or into Lincoln Financial to possibly beat the Eagles in the postseason, you're not going to do it with moronic running back play. That they rank 29th in the NFL in rushing yards, and that's climbed a little bit because Josh Dobbs has used his legs in the past 2 weeks. But the one question mark now, about a month ago, we had 50 question marks for the Vikings. The big one now is whether or not they can use the final 7 games of the regular season to establish a running game. They have not thus far. There's some carries where Ty Chandler has some burst, and we're like, yeah, Give him all the carries. And then every once in a while, Madison does something productive, and you're like, all right, maybe he's going to turn it around. But consistently or inconsistently, no Vikings running back has turned on the gas to become a bell cow or even a conglomeration of all 3 or 5 of them haven't done the trick. So that's the top of the Vikings to-do list next week and the week after that. And then after that is between Madison, probably not him because he would have done it by now. Akers is gone. He's not coming back anytime soon. Chandler and Nwangwu, Gaskin, or Dwayne McBride, one or two of those guys got to chip off about 4 yards per carry like a normal NFL running back would, because just running to run to try to control the time of possession, that's fine and dandy. But if you can't close out a game against the Saints because of your, futility in running the football, that's what separates you from being a wild card participant and a Super Bowl winner. And I know that sounds like something a boomer would say, you got to run the football. But when it gets down to the playoff nitty gritty, it's not about, running on first and second down. It's getting into the second half when you are up 27-3 and closing the lid on an opponent because you can run the ball and basically run out the clock. The Vikings couldn't do that yesterday, and they were a Hail Mary away from disaster. But sorry to end on a sour note. I just have a utopian vision that somewhere along the line, because it's an offense-first head coach, they're going to figure out, all right, it's Ty Chandler. We're going to give him 25 carries, and he does the thing. Or, we're going to have an equitable split with Dwayne McBride and Myles Gaskin. By the time we get to Christmas or so, I hope they have figured that out. Because if it's the way it is right now, where Madison just slams into the line of scrimmage and we're like, oh, who would have thought that would have happened? They're not going to be able to get too far in the postseason. But don't let that dampen your overall enthusiasm on the product, because let's face it, they were 1-4 with Jefferson hitting IR, and now they're 6-4 with Jefferson probably on his way back this week or next. That's all I got. We'll be back Tuesday or Wednesday to talk more about this leading into Broncos primetime. Skol, baby.